when I'm in a situation and I'm just like, this scene or whatever it is not working, more times than not, that's because I've overcomplicated what needs to be done. But oftentimes when I encounter those situations, I think a lot of people's instinct is, oh, just add a new node, add a new node, add a new node. My instinct these days is just to literally hit reset and start over from scratch, right? Because the more complicated I get, I tend to do worse worse things.
Hi, and welcome to Color and Coffee, a podcast that focuses on the craft of color grading and the artist behind it. I'm your host, Jason Bowdacious, and each week we'll sit down with some of the most talented and creative colorists in the industry and have a casual chat from one colorist to another. We'll share their stories, their insights, their grading tips, and of course, their beverage of choice. Whether you're a seasoned colorist or just starting out in the industry, join us for some great color discussion. Strap in, grab your mug. You're listening to Color and Coffee. I am thrilled to have colorist, entrepreneur, trainer, and really one of my mentors, Robbie Carman. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me, man. It's good to catch up.
My pleasure. So first off, one of the most important questions I ask every guest of the show, what are you drinking today?
Well, it is about lunchtime here, but I am still consuming a Yeti-sized cup of cold brew iced coffee. Because you need 64 ounces or whatever of coffee per day. Yeah, that's what I'm on this morning. I'll have a sip.
Absolutely, the colorist beverage of choice. Now,
it's a little too early for the whiskey, so keep it on the coffee.
So as a cold brew fanatic myself, what do you like for cold brew? Is there a specific brand or anything?
No, I'm not a snob when it comes to coffee. Like, I don't have a coffee press. Like, I'm fine just going to like Dunkin' Donuts and getting like a regular drip hot coffee. I don't need like macchiatos and whipped cream and whatever flavored foam. I'm just give me a cup of regular coffee and I'm good.
A natural man, I like it. I'm sipping on some a vanilla latte.
My kids on the other hand are snobs. At 10 and 15 years old, they need like triple shots of this with no water and blah blah. And I don't even understand the language. I'm just like, give me a regular cup of coffee.
I hear you, man. Oh, well, at least they haven't gotten into the frappuccinos and the blended drinks with sugar.
Oh no, my son has, and it's purely because he's a sugar addict, and we have to moderate that for sure. Otherwise, he'd be bouncing off walls. Combine the sugar with the caffeine. It's a recipe for disaster.
He'll move to pure caffeine soon, like a real colorist.
I hope not. Yeah, no worries.
Well, now that we've gotten the beverages out of the way, I wanted to talk a little bit about you. Do you want to share a little bit about your history and your background?
Yeah, sure, man. My name's Robbie. I'm a professional colorist and educator and all the other various things that you said. I kind of arrived on what I do sort of accidentally. When I was younger and a teenager, I had aspirations and dreams of being a rock star and making it rich that way, and had a passion for performing and playing music. Still to this day, I have a bajillion guitars all over the house, and I have a little project studio here at home, and I record as much as possible. And initially went to school to study music, and then realized that probably not going to be a rock star. It was actually my first introduction to doing video work. This is at the time in college, mid to late 90s. I had some guys doing some tracking for them in the recording studio. And one of the guys walked in and was like, "Hey man, do you know anything about video?" And held up, it was probably a high 8 camera at the time, and said, "Hey man, we really want to shoot a music video. Can you help us out?" And I was like, well, I guess I'm a little technical. Yeah, sure. And believe it or not, one thing led to another, and I started down that path of discovering video. And like a lot of other people in our industry, of my age group anyway, started out as what we refer to as assistant editors or E2s. In those days, it was in linear rooms, running the Chiron, going back into the machine room and swapping out digibeta and later on HD cam decks and all that kind of stuff, and blacking tapes and setting everything up for the for the editors in the room with the big, giant, huge consoles and huge switchers could do their thing. And right around that time, I was introduced a little bit to color work. And at the time, the controls were in the linear rooms was very rudimentary. It was just a TBC, kind of a little pedestal, a little setup, and that kind of stuff. But the place that I was working had some DaVinci systems, and that's what kind of I initially learned and kind of was trained on, and that kind of stuff. And
was it even a 2K at that point, or was it pre-2K?
Yeah, it would have been an 888, and then a 2K, and then a 2K plus. This is at the time when we're talking about literally heavy iron kind of machines. The company would come in with a rack of gear and go, "Hey, here's your machine." This was heyday of Quantel and discrete logic, DaVinci systems, Quantel with the paint box and the Henry and all those, those various machines. This is when people joke now, but this is when, a DaVinci setup was $500,000 to $1 million+ dollars. Thinking about it now, it's just it's amazing the tools that we have compared to back then. But in the early 2000s, I decided to jump out on my own, do my own thing, and quickly realized that, oh man, I can't probably ever afford $1 million, DaVinci box. And so, like a lot of people, kind of floundered with various desktop color corrections. I actually have a funny story. Later in the mid 2000s, I actually purchased Silicon Color's Final Touch 2K. I think it was about 25 grand, something like that, 30 grand. I actually got a loan from my folks to go after this software. And this was probably around this time of year, February, March. I'm all stoked about this. Go out to NAB that year. And I remember it was yesterday. An Australian colorist, David Gross, got up on stage for Apple and was like, "Hey, I'd like to introduce Apple Color." And I knew that Silicon Color had gotten purchased by Apple, but I had no idea what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And literally a month earlier, I had spent buckets and buckets of cash on the software to only now have it be included as part of Final Cut Studio. So that was a little gut check. But yeah, I've been running my own company, now 20 years or so. In various shapes and fashions. These days, it's myself, my partner, Joey DeAnna. Joey is another well-known educator and colorist, and we've been partnered for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. And, we complement each other and do that work with the work that we do, so that's great. And then, as you also know, education has been a constant theme in my life. In those early 2000 days, I was part of the first generation-ish of Final Cut Pro instructors. I think that was probably Final Cut 2 or 3, somewhere in that range, and did a lot of work within that ecosystem, contributing to a lot of the Apple Pro Training Series books. I was also a early lynda.com author doing stuff on Apple Color, funny enough, and various color-related things. And then I spun that into around 2011, 2012, along with Dan Moran and Patrick Inhofer. We started mixinglight.com, which is obviously a well-known, decade later, a well-known and respected color training website for everything Resolve, Premiere, whatever it is, anything color-related. So I was an owner and manager of that business for about a decade. In December of 2021, Dan and I left Mixing Light, but it's still going strong with Patrick at the helm. And these days, I'm just trying to keep my head above water and grading all the time, and all that kind of fun stuff. So that's the protracted version of about me.
Well, you are doing quite a bit, man. I think one of the funniest things in the story that I hadn't heard about is how you got washed over by what was going to be Apple Color.
I don't have any PTSD about it, Jason. It's cool. I mean, I'm still not my parents are, I think, still trying to collect that. Here I am in my mid 40s, and I think my folks are still trying to collect on that loan.
Well, they probably have quite the interest on that. So
yeah, right. It's probably up to about 150 grand now, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, we've all, in some way, maybe not the 25 grand, but we've all experienced that. Resolve started off, like you said, at $500,000, and then it went down to, I believe, 1,000. And then it went down to $299, I believe, is that now. And everybody that has had a license for it has experienced that. I don't want to call it a collapse, but that readjustment of our industry for software. And I think you have a tremendous attitude toward it, as opposed to feeling ripped off. You feel the evolution of our industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about it, right? Is that everything goes that way eventually, and the democratization of the tools and the cost of the technology and I mean, everything shrinks down, gets smaller, faster, better. I'm just sitting here. The machine I'm on, talking to you on, is in one of those M1 Ultra Mac Studios. And it just boggles my mind that this little square box can do stuff, run circles around gear that I had even 5 or 6 years ago. That's just the way of the industry. And I think if you get mad about it, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. It's just better to be strategic about it, pick your battles when you can. And when you decide to go a certain direction, go that direction and be happy about it while it's serving you. And when it's not serving you anymore, think about upgrading and moving on.
That's probably that might be one of the best tips that you gave throughout this entire podcast. As a fellow hardware nerd, I get and I can get attached to my gear, especially when you're spending so much money on it. I too have made quite a big investment into the Apple silicone range. I'm currently rebuilding my office right now, nice. Basically to be completely around it. And it's amazing how far technology has come. But 3 years ago, if I would have put my foot in the sand and said, this is everything that I'm going to do, and this is where I'm going to be with technology, then I probably wouldn't be where I am today. Being flexible.
I mean, I've always taken an approach with gear, especially, is that, I mean, those folks who know me well know that I'm kind of a gearhead, and they're just like, oh man, you're always chasing the next big thing. I've always taken the approach as a small boutique company, as not having huge engineering staff, etc. One of the fights that I have all the time is just trying to stay on or slightly in front of that technological curve, because I do believe that as independent operators, as small shops, etc., like that's how especially early on in my career, when things did actually cost $1 million for this or that or whatever, it was a battle. It was a fight to stay on capabilities with people, right? Like, at that time, you had to be able to say to clients like, no, we got the whatever, insert whatever piece of gear here. And we can do that same service that the big shop can do. Of course, these days, that's a little bit less of a concern with, the democratization of the tools and all that kind of stuff that you said, and things being file-based and all that kind of stuff. But still, to a certain degree, my approach is always be a little speculative on things, to try to stay out in front of that curve as little as much as possible, without sinking the ship. For example, when it comes to big, monitor purchases, computer purchases, that kind of stuff, I generally take the approach of like leasing or financing, that kind of stuff, so it's not a huge hit to my cash flow. And it just allows me to keep that kind of like that turnover, right? Every 2, 3, 4 years, I'm swapping out for the latest and greatest kind of thing. And that's so far in 20-something years of doing this, that's proved to be pretty successful.
That's some great tips. I don't know a lot of people that look at leasing large pieces of hardware like at that, myself included. So I'm going to have to start looking into that as well.
Yeah, it's just much easier than coming up with whatever 10, 15 grand or 20 grand or whatever it is out of your pocket to make that happen. And from a cash flow, I mean, listen, I'm not an accountant, so I'm not giving accounting advice to anybody. But I have found that to be a good cash flow thing, a good way to stay up on technological curve. I mean, it kind of drives me crazy, kind of gives me a little bit of OCD panic attacks when every couple of years I'm ripping down the machine room or ripping apart the desk or whatever it is. But that's the life that I've chosen to lead,
As somebody who had to make a multi-$1,000 purchase about 2 weeks ago, and even though all the metrics say it's good and everything, all the business prospects say it's good, still makes me so nervous pressing that purchase button.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. If anybody needs some servers, just let me know. I got a stack over here in the corner. No, I'm kidding.
So I'm going to take that and I'm going to venture into, so you as a small business owner, you happen to run DC Color. Mm-hmm. And you're a Dolby Vision provider in the DC area.
Yep.
And that's something that I and a lot of colorists look up to. You're running a really basically high-end facility in an area, and you're providing Dolby Vision services to Disney and Netflix, and I mean any variety of clients. Especially, we were talking about National Geographic. So in this area, clients that are not necessarily familiar with Dolby Vision, and so you're bringing technologies like Dolby Vision and HDR to the prime time.
Yeah.
And like you were talking, that technology is pretty expensive. I mean, we just saw Sony just announced a brand new monitor for, they haven't announced the price yet, which always makes me nervous. But when somebody on this podcast is looking at you and go, wow, I want to be somebody like Robbie. I want to have a facility like this. I want to be in a small business. I don't want to be in a large color facility. Where do you suggest somebody start like this? Obviously, they can run a small facility in their house, but how does somebody start to prep and path out their way?
Yeah, it's a nuanced, slightly complicated question, so I'll try to answer it from a couple different points of view. So first, I think to me, it's running a small business is not for everybody, right? I mean, I'm not trying to say this to gloat or blow, to boast or anything, but like it's not for everybody. The pressures of having to make payroll and pay rent and manage clients and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Jason, it's funny. I spend so much of my day, on Zoom phone calls with, doing sales stuff on QuickBooks, running invoices, and what all these kind of things.
Yeah.
And of course, that can scale, depending on how big you want to get and that kind of stuff. When I started out, I think the overwhelming thing for me as a young guy out of college, who, like most young guys out of college, thinks they know a lot more than they really do. 20 something years ago, I made the decision that like I really don't want to be the low man on the totem pole, right? I really don't want to be that guy working in the machine room at 3 a.m., swapping out tapes, whatever. And there was, I'll be, looking back on it now, the amount of hubris that I had about my technical capabilities, my creative capabilities, like it's comical now looking back, doing that introspection and looking at myself back then. What a little proverbial S I was,
that makes two of us.
Yeah, exactly. Thinking I knew everything about everything. But I think at that time that sort of seeded the idea that I really wanted to kind of do my own thing. I personally find satisfaction and pleasure of the weight being on me, right? Like if something's going to fail, I want it to be my fault, not like that situation where whatever, a manager, a middle tier guy screwed up, now the company's going under, right? Like I'd rather have that pressure on me. So I knew right away that like, yeah, I wanted to start my own thing, do my own thing, and fight those battles myself. And again, that's not for everybody, but that's what I decided to do. And then the second part about that we already spoke about is kind of just I had this desire right as these tools started to being democratized from the $1 million systems and all the hardware and stuff. I really did see, no, this is a pathway. Like I can do this in a cost-effective, relatively cash-affordable model without having to be tied up in $1 million boxes and all the financing and the support contract. And that's just a factor of timing. Like I was lucky to be alive doing the things I was doing at the time and make it work. If I had 10 years either way, it probably would have been a different story. And I think the thing for me was that I always knew, and this is a big important factor for me, I always knew that I didn't want to be a 50-person company or a 100-person company. I wanted to sort of design the lifestyle that worked for me, have 2, 3, 4 people, have some partners that did other things. I mean, and to this day, that's true. I mean, like, it's basically Joey and I. Occasionally we'll bring another colorist or occasionally an assistant or whatever. But we share space and partner with an audio company for over 15 years. They're called Odd House Audio. They're great. And so I just kind of knew that that was for me. I think these days, dude, it's, the biggest determining factor, I think that's hard for a lot of people because the tools are there, the skill level's there. I mean, more people know about this stuff than ever before. I mean, when I started teaching color stuff, it literally was a dark art. And now, I mean, you can pretty much go anywhere, whether it's Mixing Light or Ripple or YouTube or whatever, people are teaching this stuff. And so I think it's easier in that regard more than ever to do it. I think still what separates what I refer to as kind of the bedroom colorist versus like the boutique owner is that ability to have client supervised space, place where a client can come in, do work, feel comfortable. That's not your house, right? And I think that's a big distinction for a lot of people, whether they say it or not, between kind of what they want. Like I don't think a lot of bedroom colorists, and I'm not trying to say that as a derogatory term, it's just, it is what it is. They're working out of their house, they're doing whatever. They're probably not going to get a B level or A level Netflix project because they don't have the facility, they don't have the physical space, they don't have the certifications like TPN and all that kind of stuff.
The infrastructure,
so I think
that's required.
Yeah, the infrastructure, basically. Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that too is kind of the physical infrastructure, the hardware infrastructure, the client infrastructure, right? Like when somebody comes in the space and I'm working, I need somebody to greet them. I need somebody to show them, the Wi-Fi password, where the bathrooms are, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think that's part of it as well.
I mean, I hate to say it, but it brings the bill up. And if they can pay that bill, then that's fantastic. And if they're not looking for that, then there's the middle range, which I think has expanded drastically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the market that I play in, is the great middle. I'm under no illusions that I'm going to be doing, Game of Thrones, or I'm going to be doing like a Rihanna video or whatever it may be, right? Like, I think that, especially in my market, and people always are, by the way, are like, DC, what's that? I mean, DC dollar for dollar is a very big post-production production market with a lot of various networks here. And anyway, I digress. My point is that middle, and especially the higher end of middle, is where I kind of operate and want to be, right? And that's a huge middle. And to be clear, I think that some colorists and some people, some entrepreneurs and facility owners go in with this mindset of like, it is A-level Netflix or bust, right? I think then they acquiesce to doing lower. Like, I've never had the mindset that doing a corporate video for somebody is any less important than doing the Dolby Vision premiere show, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, their money is still green. You know what I'm saying? If they're willing to pay the rates, it doesn't really bother me if it's a corporate training video versus, a narrative feature. As long as they're paying the bills and they're paying the rates that we want, it's good for me.
Oh my God, there's so much to unpack in there. We had a similar conversation, I want to say about a year ago, and I want to say had a dramatic change in the way that I look at different clients now. And you said that same thing. You called it the great middle. It really changed the way that I look at different projects now, because to me, that great middle has expanded so much. And instead of fighting over what is shrinking, the AAA titles, this middle, especially with things like Max and everything else, our middle is expanding. And especially now that they're being mastered in Dolby Vision, there is so much content that needs to be colored and finished that in a professional manner. And like you said, if they pay well and they pay consistently, their projects are just as good as everything else. And in fact, if they are less drama, then they're better.
To be honest with you, I find that the higher end middle client is actually in many ways, from just a creative point of view, from a business point of view, is a lot less stressful and demanding than you find on the lower end of things and the thing that you find on the really high end of things, right? Like, I mean, I've sat in rooms doing agency work with 7 people who all have different opinions. They're yelling at each other. They're yelling at you. And I'm just like, yeah, I can deal without that. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather it's cool and like great. I can put that on my portfolio. It's for a big brand, whatever. But like the stress involved in that, I'd way rather do the whatever. I keep saying this, but like the corporate training video with someone who's like, oh, it looks great, whatever, for the same amount of money without the stress and be totally cool with it. And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of people in our industry overlook. Because look, I'm like everybody else. If I could work on insert A-list feature here, of course, like that would be creatively rewarding. It would be a big feather in my cap. But I realize that I'm not, as a small business owner doing what I do and whatever, I am not going to compete with Company 3 to get James Cameron's or whatever, whoever, insert big, A-list director, DP. I'm not going to be doing that work. So it sounds like a defeatist attitude. It's kind of like I'm just settling. But I don't look at it that way. I look at, that great middle and being a much bigger pool of projects that are much more realistic for me to work on, that maybe I don't have the same notoriety, maybe it's not the same level of profile, but whatever. If it's paying the bills, my family's happy, all that kind of stuff, it's good by me.
I also think you touched on something that's pretty important there. You touched on family and you're running a business. You're focusing on stability, which I think is incredibly important. And you have other things to do than just focusing on this one project. I do think that it's hard when people are working on very high budget AAA movies. That's the focus. That is the goal. And it's hard to, you can forget about your life and family and stuff, and that can be pushed to the side. And that's incredibly damaging when you're doing that consistently.
Dude, I can't tell. I mean, I think that some people like this. I definitely know some people like this who have had it in their mind, and I can't fault them for this, right? They've had it in their mind that in whatever niche or genre that they're really excelling at, whether it be music videos or features or whatever, that they have this singular focus to be the guy or the gal in that niche, and they do everything possible to make that happen. Long hours, never saying no, in the suite for 20 hours a day for, 7 days a week kind of thing. And I have to respect that drive and that passion. I know a lot of people like that. But I would also say that every single one of those people that I know that are like that, at some point, has crashed and burned, had this existential life crisis, whether it's worth it, whether they should still be doing it. And then they seem to have these patterns of like, well, no, I'm going to scale back a lot. No, I'm going to scale up. I'm going to scale back. And like, you're right. My approach has always been design the lifestyle that you want. Right. And then, I think we tend to, in this industry, think that that pain factor of working like that is somehow like making you better. Like it's building up your character or whatever.
It's getting a thicker skin. We're going to be better in the next one.
And I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all done the projects where we probably pushed a little too hard, but the people who are doing it consistently, like I said, I respect them because that's an amazing amount of effort and work. But I also worry about the folks that I know that are like that, right? Who sometimes I feel like are at the mental breaking point. Sometimes their life has just flashed them by. Look, I got 2 kids. They're now basically 10 and 15. And when they were really little, I kind of had a little bit more of that in my life, like a little bit more of like constantly pushing, constantly being in a suite. And a decade on, I'm kind of like, well, I don't remember that. Oh, was I there? And like, there was a lot of situations in my life when my kids, especially, were really little that like, it's fine. Like, they're not like damaged goods or anything, but I'm like, oh yeah, I was working that Saturday for that birthday party or wherever, those kind of things. And it got to a point in my career, in my life, where I just said, look, I'm never going to be the guy at insert huge company here working on huge project there, right? And it's, again, sounds defeatist, but I've never been happier after I realized that decision and made that decision, because I wasn't chasing something that, for me at least, I think was probably unattainable. Again, no problem with people who are working like that. Sometimes I think it's good to just take a pause, breathe, kind of reevaluate what you're doing, because eventually people do burn out.
I don't think that's defeatist at all, because you're actually allowing yourself to come to work fully charged for your clients too. I mean, I've certainly burned out, and it's a lot of people in our industry have burned out, and we know that the divorce rates are really high, particularly in our industry. I know quite a few people that are on, unfortunately, their second or third marriage, and I know a couple of top A colorists that are in their ridiculous number of marriage. And that, to me, when I found that out, was something that I personally said, this is not worth it for me. As much as I'd love to have a really long credit list, I'd really like to be happy and enjoy what I do. When I decided to be a colorist, I wanted to do it because I loved what I do, not because I wanted to have a long credit list on IMDb.
He was a professor of mine who has become a good client of mine over the years. I don't know his exact words, but the gist of this was something like, it's TV. Nobody's going to die. And I think that as an industry and as operators, sometimes we don't actually listen to that kind of advice or things that are said like that. And we do kind of like, I mean, listen, I'm not doing open heart surgery on anybody where there's a chance that like the person I'm working on is going to die, right? I'm moving pixels around on a screen. I'm sorry it's a little too blue or a little too red or a little too whatever. I think we're all at some level pleasers, like, right? We're fixers, right? Mm-hmm. And it's especially in the color world. Like we're there. It's the dog and pony show. People getting out of their companies, out of their workplaces, coming to our spaces, working in these nice suites and paying good dollars, per hour. And so there's this dog and pony show where you're always trying to please people, say yes, do all those kind of things. But, the reality of it is, if something is not 100% perfect, it's fine. Again, the work ethic, and I don't want people to confuse me, because I have a very strong work ethic and I always want to do my absolute best on something. But I also live by this adage of not everything's art. You know what I'm saying? And at some point in time, I think the one thing that everybody has to learn is get the project to the point where people are pretty happy with it. Because if you obsess about that particular thing and ad nauseum, you're going to drive yourself crazy. You're probably going to do actually a worse job than you would if you just treated it a little lighter. And at the end of the day, I'm sure you've been in this position where you've gone, oh, well, this client has a budget of, I'm just going to insert a number here. They have a budget of $1,000 and you've done $7,000 worth of work on the project. Like, that's not, like, no, like, you can't, like, at a certain point, and we all have been there. We all do that every once in a while. Yeah. But I have, in the past decade or so, I've taken the attitude of, going to do my absolute best within the parameters of the project. And I'm trying to not live with things as much as I used to. And I honestly, I've been way happier about that.
Yeah, it's not personal. I chase my tail. I used to chase my tail. It's still something that I'm working on. And just letting it go out the door as best as it can be, especially for content that's not live or die. So I was in an interview with a pretty well-known color house in LA, and they mentioned something to me that really completely envelopes that entire attitude. This was a couple of years ago, back when I was a little bit more aggressive. But when I heard this comment, it was, I will almost say, career changing for me, because immediately I had to evaluate what I was doing there. And his comment to me, and this was a producer, this wasn't a colorist, but this was a producer. And his comment was, "We're not saving lives here, but it's pretty damn close." And immediately, as badly as I wanted this job, immediately, I just foresaw my life at this place. And imagine if they see themselves saving lives, what are they going to be asking of their staff? That is so rampant in our industry. And I think it really causes people to, one, burn out, and two, leave post-production, which is terrible.
Yeah. And I think that if you look at the people that thrive and succeed well in that kind of environment, they're a different breed. I mean, like the top people, at these major facilities, they have a way of, at least is my observation of this, I know this from far, not, in brief talks with some of these people, but it seems to me they have a way of really kind of compartmentalizing a lot of that stress, right? And it seems to me a lot of those people are also very private people, and they've learned the value of family and when to turn it off and that kind of stuff. I think the problem with the great majority of us is that we actually have a problem compartmentalizing, right? We can't be like, this is a work problem and now I'm home. The great majority of us, we're at the office or whatever doing this work, and then you come home and then it's bugging you when you're sitting on the couch and all you're thinking about is, oh, did I screw that project up? And next thing you know, at 11 o'clock, at night, you're driving back to the office, or you're going downstairs in your house and
remoting into
the computer
office
on and trying to mess with it. And it's hard. And I mean, again, I have nothing but respect for that type of person at those types of facilities doing that work. I mean, like, listen, do I like watching all the shows they make? Absolutely. They're beautiful and they're great. I'm just saying, for me, I made the choice that, like, nope, I'm happy right here in my lane, and that's where it is. And I'm not going to drive myself crazy trying to achieve these things that are going to give me burnout, less time with my family, all those stuff.
They're incredible artists, but it's a very difficult lifestyle to have. I think it's the general thing that I've learned. So,
and I think if you asked any of those types of folks, I think they would acknowledge on some level that, yes, very rewarding creatively, technically, working with the biggest producers, actors, whatever in the world. But there's moments that it's just like, it's tough. Yeah, I'm sure. And if they were being honest, that they would cop to that for sure.
But you mentioned it earlier. Our industry shows that as being the only way, and there's not. There's a bunch of other ways that we can go. Moving on to another subject, I wanted to ask, if I were to take you onto a desert island and you are only allowed to take a very small suitcase, and in that suitcase you can take one grading tool, what grading tool would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just have to say, even though I don't utilize these tools 100% of the time, I'd say it's just have to be lift, gamma, gain. I mean, like, yeah, I think the cool answer is, offset and printer points and, those kind of things. But, like, in reality, it's like if I had to bang through 1,000 shots in a show, black, white, saturation, next shot, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I had to do it with just a single tool set, that's probably what it would be. I mean, it would be great if they were color space aware lift, gamma, gain.
One day.
I mean, I would say if I had a choice, if I could bring, one other tool set, I rely a lot on the secondary curves, hue versus hue, hue versus sat, that kind of stuff. That would be another one. If I could sneak something in my luggage, that would
throw
probably
it in the front compartment.
And I'm really kind of conflicted on this because, like, in reality, I'm much more of an offset printer point kind of person. In contrast, pivot kind of thing, those tools. But if I had to sum it all into one bag, it would probably be lift, gamma, gain.
Awesome. And you know what? A lot of people go with the offset, and I love that you
Yeah.
went with the more generalized control
Well,
because
I
you
think
only
that's a
have
cool
one.
answer. I think everybody's like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing like film style grading. It's offset. It's printer point." Like in reality, it's sort of like, "Nah, you're just gonna game that up and drop blacks and like move on." You know?
And well, you mentioned it right there. What are you going to do if you need to expand the contrast, or this one's really milky and this one's really, and you're stuck there. So I love that answer. And the whole reason I asked that question is to remind people to start thinking as simple as possible, and that we make grading so complicated with all these different tools, and that really it's just as about as simple as we can make it to get the shot out.
100%, man. There is no, when I talk to young colorists or have had assistants in the past, like I play a lot of golf, and so the golf's a passion of mine. And I always say to them, my dad said to me when I was a kid, like, there's no pictures on the scorecard, right? I kind of think the same way about grading. Like, sure, you could have 14,000 nodes and use every tools available and resolve. All that really matters is what ends up on screen and if people are happy with it, right? Like nobody's going back and being like, did you use this tool? You know, like, no, it just, whatever works for the project and gets things on screen. That's it.
That's definitely a recent colorist thing on Instagram where people are like, you use the FPE letter, you use this tool, but no one ever knows what they're using. And that's when I think it's great when I'm like, I have no idea what they use, but that looks great.
I mean, I'm a victim to that, and we all are, right? Of trying the latest and greatest tool or whatever. But like, I'm with you. I don't think complexity necessarily breeds great results. I think that a lot of times when I look at, especially from the education point of view, when I, doing a lot of that kind of work, people have students who are like, look, I've used 600 nodes and I have 14,000 corrections. And I'm like, yeah, but that image looks horrible. And here's where it's broken. And here's where it's broken. Like, how about one node and just some contrast and some color balance? And it's like, I'm a firm believer that less is often more in color work. And years ago, and I mean, you've had the pleasure of working with him directly. I have not, but years ago, I heard everybody's favorite Company 3 colorist, Walter Vapato, say, something to the effect of like, respect the photography. Walter gets to work with some of the best DPs and directors in the world. So his photography that he's getting to look at is probably a lot better than a lot of the photography that I get to look at. But at the same time, my point, what I've taken that to mean in my life and the work that I do is that sometimes it's not your role to invent the shot with 14,000 corrections, right? Sometimes your role is just to support what's there, right? And, improve what you can improve and move on. And I see a lot of young colorists essentially over coloring and over grading things because they're trying to invent a shot that's not actually there in the principal photography, right? And I think that's dangerous because then you're kind of inserting your own look and feel. You're making up stuff that didn't really happen on set. And there's a place for that kind of stuff. Of course. But I try to take the approach of, generally speaking, less is more, kind of respecting that photography.
I'll add in a quote that Walter told me. I don't actually remember what movie it was on. He was working with the DP and he took it a little too far. The DP reached out to him and said, "Thank you for reshooting my movie."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and in that great middle that we've spoken about, I mean, a lot of those clients have no idea what they're doing in the first place, so they actually are relying on you to do a little bit of that work compared to the very well thought out, very well opinionated. I mean, like, the DPs that he probably works with have spent years of their life choosing lenses, camera systems, lights, all kinds of stuff. So I get that. But I just think that when I'm in, I'll put it into practical terms. When I'm in a situation and I'm just like, this shot is, or this scene or whatever it is not working, more times than not, that's because I've overcomplicated what needs to be done. Right. And it took me a while, years of, having those situations encounter. But oftentimes when I encounter those situations, I think a lot of people's instinct is, oh, just add a new node, add a new node, add a new node. My instinct these days is just to literally hit reset and start over from scratch, right? Because the more complicated I get, I tend to do worse things, if that makes sense.
It was like spices. How it's so easy to over spice something, and it's usually better with less spices. That's how color grading is.
I think that wasn't me, but I'm going to steal that. That's a really great analogy, right? It's like once it's there in the pot, it's really hard to take it back. But like if if somebody wants a little more salt, sure, we can pepper that on a little bit more or whatever. But yeah, no, that's a good analogy for sure.
I think to avoid that harsh situation of accidentally overcorrecting a movie, I tend to consider myself as like the DP's assistant. It's really easy for us to sort of step in, especially now that the colorists we're starting to see the light of day a little bit, and people are starting to recognize color a little bit more than about 5 or 10 years ago. But I think it's really important to remember what we are. And we are the DP's assistant. And we're not this hotshot Photoshop look creator, which is what a lot of people think colorists are. And remembering that we are there to assist the DP in post, and that's what our job is.
It's funny because that's like, to me, it's like an inverse funnel of how that works, because you would think you talk to a lot of very successful colorists and they have that attitude that you're just espousing. Then you look at the kind of entry level side of things, and it's like, that tends to be the kind of project, the kind of colorist or whatever that's overdoing it, right? And, I think that is, it's needed sometimes, but it's really interesting to me how that works. So like, as you progress in your career and get to work on bigger and better projects, you're actually required to do less and less and less. I often daydream, when I get a project in that's whatever, there's iPhone shots or GoPro and they're 11 stops overexposed and, everything is grainy. I often think to myself, but what would an insert A-list colorist here? How would they do? Like they'd have a heart attack, right? Like it's like what would, and granted, all of those people have done their battles with that and paid their dues and worked their way up. But it's just really funny to me that, I'm sure that if the average person looked at the original uncolored photography of a lot of high-end projects, their first instinct would be like, well, that looks great. Like, what do I need to do to it? You know what I'm saying?
The show that's done. Next shot, please.
Okay, cool. It's colored. Like, move on. And that's again, I think that's something earned. I think that's something that, not saying at all that those people have it easy, because they have a lot of other pressures and a lot of other things that they have to deal with. But that is a nice little spoil of having worked your way up the food chain, is that you do get better and better photography that requires actually a little less to do sometimes.
And on the flip side of that, you have that much more stress because there's that much more money and time put behind that. And so it's not, you might have great photography, but then there's a lot more pressure for you to deliver, specifically because we had that vision and we were looking and there's all these producers on set.
Listen, I can't tell you that I've ever had a DP sitting in my room going, oh, it's a quarter of a point off in exposure, or that color temperature's 6,211 Kelvin, not 6,205. Like that doesn't happen to me, right? But I can imagine that you have creative professionals at the top of their game in those rooms on those type of projects. That can be a really hard balance to manage, for sure.
If viewers or listeners wanted to learn more about you or find you, where could we find you and DC Color?
Yeah, for sure, man. So just dccolor.com is website. You can find me, Robbie.Carman, Carman. It's one car, one man on Instagram. You can also find DC Color on Instagram, which is just dc.color. And yeah, I'm bouncing around. I'm answering questions on Facebook and various groups. And yeah, that's probably the best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure having you on your show.
Yeah, man, thank you. Thank you so much, man. It's always good to catch up, and best of luck with the podcast series, for sure.
Thank you so much. Until next time, I'm Jason Bodak for Color and Coffee. I'll see you guys in the next episode. And this has been Robbie Carman on this episode of Color and Coffee. Thank you guys so much, and see you in the next episode. And that's our show. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, or your podcast app of choice. If you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review. It helps us quite a bit. If you are looking for DaVinci Resolve tools, please be sure to visit our sponsor, Pixel Tools. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks with another great interview. Be safe and happy grading.